Now let's get back to something else. Let's get back to the fourth world you've built, the Stormlight Archive.
Stormlight Archive.
The Stormlight Archive.
The Stormlight Archive.
The Starlight Archive. The Stormlight Archive, which is scheduled to be a 10-book storyline.
I write compulsively. A lot of writers are like that. We just do it. Robert Jordan was about my age when he started The Wheel of Time, but I am planning to do one a year. Except for next year.
Dalinar Kholin has come a long way since his days of clomping across Alethkar, conquering for his brother Gavilar. But how much has he actually changed? In this episode of Cosmere Connections, I'm going to argue in favor of something that won't necessarily happen in a new segment I'm calling Damnation's Advocate. We're going to take a quick look at where I think Dalinar is heading, throw it out the window, and then take a stab at an alternative outcome for Dalinar's potential future in the following Stormlight Archive books, and the consequences this would have for the future of the Cosmere as a whole. In my previous video talking about Dalinar, we looked at where I believe Dalinar's character is heading. Take a look at that video for a more complete explanation, but the basic gist is as such. Dalinar's experiences with cultivation-induced memory loss have allowed him to grow as a character. This, in turn, has led to his bond with the Stormfather, his evolution into a bondsmith, and his subsequent rejection of Odium's offer to make Dalinar his champion. He then succeeded in trapping the unmade Ner'gale, better known as the Thrill, in a perfect gemstone from which he cannot escape. None of this would have been possible if Dalinar was unable to overcome the horrors of his past, as he more likely than not would have rotted away in Kholinar, drinking his fine booty to death. And yet, he does end up overcoming his past, confessing all his wrongdoings, in book format no less, and sets himself on a path that will allow him to lead the peoples of Roshar to victory over Odium. All signs point to him picking up the Shards of Honor and ascending to divinity. Indeed, in my last Dalinar video, I speculated that he will ascend to a new shard named Unity. And yet, what if this doesn't happen? What if Dalinar is unable to overcome his past, or something else happens with Odium or cultivation modifying the shards in such a way to make Unity impossible to form? What if Dalinar succeeds in his quest to destroy Odium, but intentionally or not, picks up Odium's shards as well as honors? There are so many variables that could go awry along the way. Events that could make Dalinar unable or unwilling to form the shard Unity, and instead create something far more sinister, darker, more passionate. Something that Dalinar is already quite proficient at. Dalinar could form the shard Conquest. If there's one thing we know about Dalinar's past, it's that he's an excellent example of a conquering warlord. With his brother's skill in politics to guide him, they are able to unite, or, depending on who you ask, conquer, the entirety of Alethkar in the span of a few short years. Dalinar is unintentionally aided by the unmade Ner'gale as the Thrill pushes him to continue fighting, to continue conquering. I think that there are many ways that Dalinar could unite Honor's shards, but what if the Thrill was somehow combined among them? We already know that Dalinar shares a deep connection with this unmade, which is how he's able to trap it inside the King's Drop in the first place. Is it really a leap to suggest that his soul could be bound to it in a way he cannot separate from? If he were to ascend, is it such a stretch to believe he might bring Ner'gale's investiture with him? If he ascends while Odium is still a threat, Odium might even find a way to influence his spirit web in a way that nobody could have anticipated. And this is starting to go into really theoretical territory, but what if Odium were to use Hemalogy to accomplish this? We know that he is well aware of this metallic art and might even know how to effectively use it. If he were able to find a way to put Ner'gale's investiture into a spike, Odium could even use Hemalogy to staple an entire unmade onto Dalinar's soul. We have no idea if this is possible, but evidence suggests that at the very least it is plausible. And, wouldn't you know it, Ner'gale is already trapped and in the possession of Dalinar, making this whole process that much easier. But What if the thrill is just a red herring? What if Ner'gale does not contain enough investiture to change Honor's dropped shards in any tangible way? Enter Odium himself. Let's assume for a moment that Odium is somehow shattered or splintered by the end of Book 5. Who would be the most likely candidate to pick up Odium's and Honor's shards? Well, Dalinar, of course. We know Odium has been more or less grooming him since his youth through Ner'gale and almost managed to convince Dalinar to become his champion. It would make sense that some or all of Odium could be picked up and held by Dalinar. This would thereby modify the parts of Honor Dalinar already held. If Dalinar ascends at the end of Book 5, this could even form the bulk of conflict in the back 5 Stormlight books. Dalinar's conquest of both cultivation and the rest of Roshar would be fascinating to watch play out. If this is a success, the biggest question that this would raise is, well, what does this mean for the rest of the Cosmere? So, what does this look like for the Cosmere as a whole? Once Dalinar forms the Shard Conquest in some way, the obvious answer would be that he starts, well, conquering. This would be huge for every single shard world in the Cosmere, especially if he starts picking up disparate shards Odium has already shattered. The most obvious shards to add to Conquest would be Ambition, Dominion, and Devotion, and they all have no current vessel. Dalinar might even find them easy to pick up, as any one of them could mesh quite well with the Conquest objective. This would also have the effect of adding to Conquest's already insanely large power level. It would be interesting to see how different shards and cultures view this new god, and whether they see him as a threat, someone to work with, or something else entirely. Dalinar could even be the big bad in Mistborn Era 4. This is some really shiny tinfoil here, but if Harmony were to find some way to pick up the shard autonomy, he would almost certainly find himself in direct opposition to Conquest, as well as being in a decent position to actually oppose him. This would lead to worlds and cultures combining and colliding in ways that we never would have thought possible, with both shards at this point controlling and playing an active role in multiple shard worlds, cultures, and even magic systems. What role will endowment and cultivation play in all this? What about the shards that have already been shattered? Is this even possible, or have I gone completely insane? Was I ever even sane to begin with? So what in Kellick's name does this all add up to? We know that some funky stuff is going on with Dalinar and Honor's shard. We know that Dalinar has been influenced by Odium since his youth. We know that Dalinar's been a ruthless warlord in the past. And, finally, we know that Dalinar is dead set on defeating Odium, which would leave Odium's shard wide open for someone to snatch up. To play Damnation's advocate, I believe that Dalinar could pick up the shards of Honor as well as Odium and form a new shard that would be known as Conquest. This will lead to conflicts throughout the Cosmere and will tie multiple planets and storylines together. Whew, that was a doozy. I've had this tinfoil bouncing around in my head for a few months now, and it was a ton of fun being able to share it with you all, regardless of whether or not any of it actually comes true. We're getting pretty close to the release of Rhythm of War, so I hope you're ready for all the hullabaloo surrounding that. I'll have a video speculating about Rhythm of War shortly before its release, as well as one reviewing it after reading, digesting, and properly processing it. In addition to this, I have plans to release all of the music you've heard here so far for free on my channel to give my watchers a reading companion for the Rhythm of War read-through. Storms, I've had fun rambling about all this nonsense to you, and hopefully you've had even half that fun watching. I'd kindly remind you to like, subscribe, and follow me on Twitter for some quality cremposting, as well as general updates. Have a fantastic day, folks. Was I recording? I hope so.